world of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. It's the David Knight Show.
As the clock strikes 13, it's Wednesday, the 22nd of July, year of our Lord 2026. Well, as the old Chicago song goes, while the city sleeps, men are scheming new ways to kill us and tell us dirty lies. How about an mRNA flu shot? Yeah, that was just approved by the FDA. How about mRNA cancer vaccines? That's about to begin, the quote-unquote tests. Of course, the Vax Daddy, the guy who gave us the poisonous injections to start with and boasted about it, began his second term with Stargate, going to combine mRNA with AI, for example. Or we could look at the Terminator killing machines from Endril that are rolling out as liar War Pete goes on to Capitol Hill looking for more money for more blood. That's right. New ways to kill us while they tell us dirty lies. And meanwhile, the Trump Department of Justice is blocking a New Mexico investigation into the Epstein ranch again. And a woman comes forward talking about how when he was on release during his prison sentence, he raped her and many other women. We'll be right back. Yeah, as a matter of fact, let's begin with the bigger scheme to kill us with mass poisoning. And it keeps rolling on. Yesterday, I talked about how Pfizer has just been given by the Maha people. The CDC has just given $1.25 billion to Pfizer to do more of the Trump shot, the mass murder. And now Moderna has got a new product idea. They're launching an mRNA cancer vaccine. Oh, wait a minute, you might say. I thought the mRNA vaccine gave people cancer. Yes, you're right, it did. Massive increase. And this was identified at the very beginning, if you remember, by Dr. Ryan Cole, a pathologist, who was looking at some of the people who were sick and dying from the Trump shot. He said, what I'm seeing in these people is that their killer T cells have been decimated after they've been vaccinated with this. What's going on with this? Now, that's part of the mechanism of it. But now the idea is that they're going to give you a vaccine to cure your cancer. Wait a minute, we're changing the definition of vaccine yet again, aren't we? A vaccine was always something that was going to prevent you from getting a disease, remember? That's the difference between a vaccine and a therapeutic. A therapeutic is something that you give to somebody who already has the disease to help treat or to presumably cure that disease. But we're now blurring the lines on all of the lies of virology, all the lies of the vaccine industry. None of this is consistent anymore. And of course, if you go back and you look at this and say, well, we're going to inject things that look like cancer, proteins, got a lot of different proteins that are components of cancers. We're going to inject that in so your body can learn how to identify and to fight those things. That is more like the classic definition of vaccine. And yet, when you look at what they're doing with this, they're saying they're going to use it as a therapeutic. And if you go back and look at the lies throughout the pandemic, one of the things that Fauci began insisting on, he said, I don't care if you've had the fabled disease, right? Whether it was a disease or not. I don't care if you've had that and gotten over it. That doesn't count. Natural immunity doesn't count. You got to get my shot. Well, that contradicted everything about the justification for vaccines. The whole purpose of a vaccine is to train your body's immune system in this war against disease. That's like saying, I don't care if you're an ace fighter pilot in a war. You've got to go back to the trainer. And you got to go back to the simulator, or you can't fly again, right? And that's what he was telling people. None of this stuff made sense, as I said before, even within their own lying paradigm. And it is a lie. I have come to believe that all of the quote-unquote science of virology is a lie. And certainly what they're telling us about the vaccines are a lie. That's a proven lie. Moderna is now developing an mRNA vaccine for patients with advanced or metastatic solid tumors. So again, how does that help anybody? Just think about this. You've already got cancer that your body's immune system can't handle. It's already there. Why give somebody a vaccine that has cancer proteins in it? What sense does that make? Your body is already overwhelmed. Your immune system is already fighting this and can't fight it. What kind of training are you going to give an inadequate immune system to be able to fight this? It doesn't make any sense. So they said it's intended as an off-the-shelf antigen therapy. Again, a vaccine now as therapy. And yet, will they do the same types of tests that they do with therapeutics? No, they won't. According to the drug maker, the mRNA 4200 delivers instructions to the body's cells to produce 7 proteins. This is why I said from the very beginning, I've called it the GCI, the genetic code injection, because what it's doing is it's reprogramming your body in some way. How? We don't really know. They won't tell us, right? And where is the off switch, I said from the very beginning? They had the little dog and pony show that Trump arranged where he had all the different vaccine companies at the table. He starts with the one that has the longest time frame. They've already got them prearranged, so it's going to be a descending time frame. He says, oh, that's too long. Next one, that's too long. He gets down to Moderna, and they say, well, we can do it right now because we're not going to manufacture it. Your body's going to manufacture it. We're going to turn your body into a vaccine manufacturing facility. And I said, well, that's insane. And where's the off switch, right? There isn't any. It's like it's like Mickey Mouse in the Sorcerer's Apprentice. He starts the marching brooms with the buckets of water. How do I stop this? Well, I don't know. I have to ask the pharmakia, the sorcerers. The clinical trial will test mRNA 4200 alone and with a monoclonal antibody. Now, get this, the control group is going to get a dose of mRNA 4106, another mRNA cancer vaccine that Moderna is developing. How does that make any sense? Typically, what you're supposed to do is a placebo, right? Except, as I've pointed out many times in the past, when they test these vaccines, frequently what they'll do is they'll give somebody, let's say, here's our vaccine for this, and we're going to give you the vaccine for meningitis. Well, if a lot of the damage is being done by the adjuvants, the things that are put in there to irritate your immune system, things like aluminum or whatever, or preservatives like formaldehyde, if that stuff is in both of the shots, that kind of cancels out any negative effects. You could say, well, okay, this happened to this group, but it also happened to the other control group. Why? Because they're both getting the adjuvants that were there. This is how they game the system. So they're going to give the 2 different groups will both get mRNA. They'll just get a different type of mRNA. So there will be no placebo. There will be no control group. Everybody gets a GCI. And so they said it's, many people are saying at Children's Health Defense, they're talking about how this is going to be obviously a significant risk to the public, risk that Moderna has not fully disclosed because it is not named even the 7 tumor proteins that this is going to program your body to produce. So they're going to program somebody who's already sick with cancer. Many of these people perhaps have already had their immune system compromised significantly by chemotherapy or by surgery. Now what they're going to do is program their body to create tumor proteins. Yeah, that should work really well, don't you think? If your intention is to kill people. So Jessica Rose, an immunologist and biochemist, said, undisclosed specific antigens hinder full independent assessment of the safety. She said the development of an anti-cancer vaccine that may itself result in tumor growth is a bad idea. Well, that's putting it mildly. This is murder on steroids, folks. With the approval of the government and the assistance of the government. That's what Trump gives you. That's Trump RX in a nutshell. Several experts warn the process of temporarily developing proteins or protein fragments that are common among tumors may itself result in tumor development and other forms of cancer. You think? How about that? Or other health risks, of course. So again, we were told that going back to this, that it wasn't good enough to have fought off a disease because that means that your immune system was successful and won the war. It's been trained. No. We got to inject you for that disease again. Because the important thing is taking the vaccine. So the mRNA is intended to instruct some cells to temporarily, how do we know it's temporary? Because we had examples of people, one of them a registered nurse who keeps getting tested for this. Her body has been manufacturing it I saw that last time I reported. It had been 1,500 days since she had gotten the Trump shot poison, and her body was still producing the spike protein. So it produces proteins that are commonly associated now with tumors. The immune system would then recognize and attack the cells associated with these proteins. That's the theory. But again, this is an immune system that can't currently handle the tumors by definition. It's metastatic. It is growing, it's spreading. The immune system is too weak to do anything with it. This is not a therapeutic. This is an accelerant. You need to understand that. This is criminal. Dr. Brian Hoecker warned this process itself can lead to cancer, of course. He says it seems, and it is counterintuitive, to promote a cancer therapy that causes cancer. There are several ways that mRNA technology can promote cancer, and an unprecedented increase in aggressive cancers has been observed worldwide since the rollout of the mRNA COVID-19 vaccine, the Trump shot. And again, that was predicted by Dr. Ryan Cole back in the spring of 2021 when he saw what was happening to the killer T cells, your body's primary defense against cancer. Innate immune suppression, exogenous nucleic acids, that means foreign genetic mRNA, and distinct mammalian replication, competent contaminants in the COVID vaccine vials are linked to cancer already. None of these items would presumably change in any new formulation. Other scientists said the cell growth triggered by Moderna's mRNA 4200 vaccine may not stay confined to one part of the body or remain at levels that the immune system would have the capacity to fight. And what makes you think this stuff is not going to start replicating? Moderna's clinical study raises obvious safety questions and obvious questions of informed consent. They're going to be trying this on 42 people who have tumors that are metastatic cancer, advanced cancer. I wish I could talk to those people for a half hour. I just wish I could talk to them. Pharmacologist and biologist Helene Benon said that mutant cells are resistant. And what typically happens is that you've got a cancer. One of the reasons that you see some results with somebody getting a cancer therapy is because at first, and we see this when you get bacteria that is resistant to penicillin, right? Or, you got some kind of any kind of a treatment, right, that you've got. And, they say, well, the mouse population is evolving. We now have super rats that are immune to this particular poison or whatever that we got out here. They haven't evolved. What happens is that, there's genetic variation, and that's what allows the pharmaceutical companies to get away with these massive campaigns of killing people, murder for cash. That's what this industry is.
I mean, you can even see it in something like that story you covered from the UK where that family had those 3 children that after their vaccines, there seemingly is a genetic component to this where certain families are more prone to these issues.
That's right.
And, that's why some people, they get all the vaccines, they get loaded up, and they are seemingly fine. There's not an issue. They go through life. They don't seem to have any health problems. And then these other families, one kid gets one vaccine and, they're debilitated.
That's right. And so when you look at the cancer stuff, it's a good example of this. You have genetic variation, especially within the cancer cells, because they're kind of mutant anyway. But what you're seeing here is you're not, they would always push this out there and say, look, they've evolved. We've got a new strain of bacteria or mice that have evolved. No, they haven't evolved. You've just had natural selection. It was always there in the genetic variation, just like Travis said about our human responses to these different vaccines based on our varying genetics. And so what happens is you get rid of the people who are susceptible to it, or the bacteria or the mice. And then what remains starts to breed, and now you got a new strain that is immune to that. And that's what happens in your body in terms of a lot of these cancer treatments. But as Dr. Helene Benon was saying, she says, what happens is you typically introduce this, you get some shrinkage of the tumors because some of these cells are affected. But then there's others that aren't, and they start to grow and reproduce, and it comes roaring back, right? That's why you see an initial shrinkage of the tumors, and they all come back because you haven't gotten to the root cause of all of this. And it's not broad enough in terms of how it relates to these tumors. And the fundamental cause is still there, whether it's nutritional or genetic or environmental or whatever, that still typically is not addressed by the standard treatment, right? They just focus on the tumors. They don't focus what's going on in your body overall. That's why some of these alternative therapies work so much better, because people address the diet and the contaminants and the detox and all the rest of this stuff, as well as the nutritional factors for these tumors. Perhaps it's what is going on with these antiparasitics that are out there. But she points out when the FDA looks at this, they see tumor shrinkage. And if it buys them a little bit more time because the tumors shrink, then they, consolidate, hit a floor, then they grow back and kill the person. But they look at that and they say, well, that was effective. That's effective treatment. We bought them a little bit more time and we confiscated all their worldly possessions. And so that's a success for the medical industry there. And so she said they will approve something like that. She said mRNA 4200 is an example of gene therapy product. Such products have been linked to the onset of cancer. The same mRNA lipid nanoparticle platform that's been proven to be unsafe and ineffective in the Trump shots. Yet the FDA tells this politically connected corporation, you are free to do anything. That's what FDA stands for. You got political connections. If you pay money to Trump, you're free to do anything. And well, even after 6 years of looking at the devastating effects of Trump's mRNA, VaxDaddy is out there funding another $1.25 billion worth of these shots. As much money as he's going to put into his Manhattan Project for artificial intelligence and quantum computing. What does that tell you about his priorities? What is the real Manhattan Project? Anyway, reprogramming the immune system always runs the risk of inducing autoimmune disease. And this is really not just reprogramming the immune system, but irritating it with the adjuvants that are there. I remember one of the first times I was talking about this, I was taking live calls on air, and a guy called up and I said, well, you may think that this stuff is harmless and you don't really understand everything that's in it, the contaminants, the preservatives, the adjuvants. He goes, what are adjuvants? I said, well, your enlightenment should begin at that point. Look that up and see why they put them in and see what they're putting in. The adjuvants are there to irritate your immune system. And in many cases, that's what causes your autoimmune disease. It's the aluminum and things like that I believe, that many people believe, and I believe that as well, that is what's crossing the blood-brain barrier in infants and killing them. And we call it sudden infant death syndrome. And in some cases, we go after the parents and lock them up in jail, saying they killed their kids. That was the basis of shaken baby syndrome, when there was no physical evidence of a baby being shaken. And as one person I interviewed at one point in time said, yeah, if you shook a baby hard enough to kill it, you would break its neck, because they got a big head and a very weak neck. And so that's clearly not what's going on. They're killing people with their shots and then putting family members in jail for it. Moderna has never admitted to excessive DNA contamination of the COVID-19 vaccines or DNA contamination wrapped within the liquid nanoparticles, or of the failure of DNA SE, which breaks down the extracellular DNA, and so it does not break down this kind of contamination. They just go on. And now some of the scientists are looking at this and saying, well, what else could go wrong with this? They say, well, there is a risk that these people would shed this cancer vaccine. Think about that. We've had mRNA passed on through mother's breast milk and other bodily fluids. That's been shown to take effect. Of course, the FDA says you're free to do anything to Moderna. They don't care. They're not going to pull it off no matter what happens. I mean, they could give somebody a shot and let them drop dead right there in the office, and they don't care. We've had that situation with MMR. That happened in American Samoa. You had some parents who went in, had 2-year-old kids, and they're waiting in line. One of the mothers goes in with her kid, and they give the kid the shot. The kid drops dead. And all the other the mothers in the waiting room were saying, I think we're going to go do something else today. As they start to leave. And they come out and they focus on the next one in line and tell that doesn't have anything to do with the shot. You really got to get this MMR shot for your kid. Talked her into it. She goes in, they give the kid the shot, he drops dead. And so what was the response to that? The response was to blame the nurses. The response to that was to say, well, I think this stuff was past the sell-by date or whatever. They fought against that. No matter what happens, you can, just like Trump said, I can shoot somebody dead on Fifth Avenue. They can kill somebody immediately with their injections, and nothing will ever happen to this criminal cabal.
Think of how many different newscasters or people on the news we saw have some sort of strange seizure after they'd been given the shot. Think of how many times you saw that in the weeks and months after the whole pandemic scam started rolling out.
Oh, yes. One after the other. People put those together in a loop, and we played that,
There was so many of them. I can remember at least 3 or 4, and then I guess after that, they started making sure not to put that on air.
There was even one comedian who was out there cursing Christ. And
she said, I think I'm God's favorite. I got the vaccine. And immediately as she says that, she just loses it and falls over.
Yeah, it's biblical, right?
That's one of those things where, if I didn't believe in anything and I saw that happen, it would make me go, that's
we're all going to drop dead one day, that's for sure. That's the common concern here. Well, exosomes, these are foreign genomes, can pass into bodily fluids and be excreted. We have seen this happening with many bodily fluids, especially things like breast milk. Unfortunately, we have an entire industry that is in denial and or lying. I would say that's part B. I would go with the second part of that. They know what's going on. Come on, they know what's going on. You can pull the wool over people's eyes with commercials, and you can lie to them very effectively, and most people don't even look at it. I had somebody who was, he had done some work for us and we were trying to pay him. He said, can you pay me through PayPal? And I said, no, I've been kicked off of PayPal. I can't even use it for personal matters. And he said, kicked off? Why? I said, well, because I told people about mRNA. He said, what's mRNA? This is the situation we've got. And I said, I've got a podcast. Please listen. I hope he's listening now. And I'm not blaming you for not hearing this. You're not going to hear this on mainstream media. They won't talk about this. Why? Because they're owned by these people. They're not going to bite the hand that feeds them. It was not a hostile takeover. It was a friendly takeover. They were bought out by the pharmaceutical companies back in the 1990s when they did the Know Your Doctor commercials. They're now perhaps the biggest part of the broadcast networks. They're all funded by the pharmaceutical companies, so they're not going to criticize them. If they did, they're so dependent on them now that they would go out of business. And the same thing is happening in so many different areas of medicine. And then politically, the same thing is happening with AIPAC, right? You get these people hooked on your money. This is the way that the federal government controls the state and local governments as well. Give them money, just print up this monopoly paper, give people that monopoly paper. Of course, they can get real stuff with it. And then they get addicted to it. And you threaten to cut that off if they don't do what you say. So they will do what you say, and they will not say what you do. Earlier this year, a Moderna mRNA flu vaccine received unanimous approval by the FDA. You're free to do anything. Yeah, despite safety concerns and despite low efficacy. See, this is the issue. The flu vaccine was the vaccine that had logged the most adverse effects in the VAERS database, the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. And one of the reasons for it is when you look at some of these things, you don't even have to get into the science of it to understand how phony this is. Like I said before, if you're going to tell people that the natural immune system, if you had the disease, then you still got to get the vaccine. It's like, okay, you've broken your paradigm. You've broken your lie here. And so when they go out and tell people that the flu shot, how did you come up with this year's flu? Well, every year the flu's different somehow. And so we've got a different flu vaccine. Every year you got to get the flu vaccine because every year the virus is changing, right?
I just looked up how many people are on the FDA approval board. There's between 10 to 15 consistent members and occasionally more. Do you know how difficult it is to get 10 to 15 people to agree on anything? On anything. You're telling me there's not one person that looked at this and said, I don't know, I have some reservations.
Yeah.
That's such an easy way to look at this and go, they're just rubber stamping everything that comes across their table.
They've got some reservations at a luxury resort that's been paid for by the pharmaceutical company.
Just on its face, this is like Saddam Hussein getting 100% of the vote. You should look at this and go, there's no way. There's no way that 10 to 15 apparently super intelligent people, scientists, people in their field looked at this and didn't go, something over here makes me a bit nervous.
Yeah.
At least one of them would have said something if they were actually doing their job. At least that's my opinion on it.
I agree. Yeah, well, there's these signs that are out there for anybody who wants to look at this. Again, you know, the thing about natural immunity versus getting a vaccine for the same thing that you've already gotten and recovered from. There's also the 1986 Immunity Act. Why do you need that? If when there were only 3 vaccines, they would have been put out of business if they didn't have that legal immunity. And then, of course, there's the flu shot. Every year we've got a different strain of it. And so this year we got a new strain and you got to take the vaccine, except they start manufacturing this months before flu season. How do they know? Do they have a crystal ball? You know, they have Karnak the Magnificent out there telling Ed McMahon, I think I know what the strain of flu is going to be this year. And we're going to vaccinate against that. They don't know any of that. And so there's some fundamental, this just doesn't add up type of lies that are there that permeate this entire industry. It's all about that. As a matter of fact, there's now been the largest COVID shot autopsy study that's ever been done. They looked at people who died, who had taken the shot, and they found that after people had died who had had the shot, they found that 74% of the deaths after vaccination were caused by the shot. Think about that. All these people who died after getting vaccinated, 3/4 of them died from the shot itself. They run the numbers out and they estimate that the shot killed between 470,000 and 900,000 Americans. I think that's very conservative, but even if that was the number, that is more than the number of Americans who were killed in World War I, World War II, Vietnam, and Iraq combined. That's the truth of what is happening with that. Here's a report.
We found that 73.9% of those deaths were from the vaccine. We did do a systematic review of 325 peer-reviewed autopsy cases. We looked at all of them, adjudicated all of them, were they from the vaccine or not. Unfortunately, yes, they are deadly. FDA Class 1 recall should have happened years ago. It's exceeded past vaccine withdrawal limits by like hundreds of thousands of percent. About 4 independent estimates of American vaccine, COVID-19 vaccine deaths. It ranges from about 470,000 from Pfizer alone up to 840,000 American deaths from the COVID-19 vaccines. We have to remember.
All right, we're going to take a break here, folks. We're going to be right back. Stay with us.
Hello, it's me, Volodymyr Zelensky. I'm so tired of wearing these same t-shirts everywhere for years. You'd think with all the billions I've skimmed off America, I could dress better. And I could, if only David Knight would send me one of his beautiful gray MacGuffin hoodies or a new black t-shirt with the MacGuffin logo in blue. But he told me to get lost. Maybe one of you American suckers can buy me some at thedavidknightshow.com. You should be able to buy me several hundred. Those amazing sand-colored microphone hoodies are so beautiful. I'd wear something other than green military cosplay to my various galas and social events. If you want to save on shipping, just put it in the next package of bombs and missiles coming from the USA.
Well, I got to say, one of the other things that caught my attention when we were looking at this pandemic lie that was out there was the fact that there were, and this I think we first saw it in August. They rolled it out in October of 2020, and it was how they were going to track people. And they had a tremendous amount of information, all your personal information there. When you got it, the lot number, that's a key thing, because they need to know it was an experiment. They varied the concentration significantly. And you've had people who've gone back and done a report and looked at this and found that it was it varied by about a factor of 30. And you could see the people who were dying from this basically got the higher concentration. This was a controlled experiment. You were the lab rats for them. So I thought that was suspicious, that the only thing they really tracked about it was the lot number, but also the fact that you'd have to go back in 30 days to get this. I thought, well, I really had not followed the vaccine schedule. How they get to 72 vaccines for kids by the time they're 18. A lot of that is repeat, but they're doing that, the next time you come in, we're going to give it to you again and again and again. I mean, they give you like 4 or 5 doses of some of these different vaccines. So I wasn't aware of that at the time. I thought that was kind of unusual. But there was something very specific about that 30-day interval, and we got a whistleblower doctor who talks about that. I'm going to play that for you in a second here. But all of those things, along with the fact that they did have a box there to say that you refused the vaccine. So I said, okay, so they're going to put this in their database. Are they going to use that to come after the people who don't get the shot? This all happened during Trump. And then, of course, there was the fact that it had to be refrigerated at unbelievably cold temperatures as well. There was a lot of stuff that should have caused your spidey sense to tingle. But here's a doctor talking about what was so special about that 30-day interval for the booster.
It decreases the ability to produce white blood cells by 50% from your first vaccine. Then 8 weeks later, which is white blood cell reproductive system, so your ability to make another generation of white blood cells is 8 weeks. That's why they set it up 8 weeks later, to hit it again. So you hit the white blood cell ability while it's down. So now what you do is now they decrease the saline in the second one, and they increase the harmful ingredients. So now you have a shift in the ingredients. So they decrease the saline and increase. So now there's a shift. And then what they do is that second dose attacks your ability to make white blood cells by an additional 25%. So now you only have a white blood cell ability, like the ability to make white blood cells, functioning at 25%. So you just wiped out 75% of your military and the ability to make that military. Then what they do is they set in the booster. The booster has 81 strands of foreign bacteria that your cells have never come across, so you don't have the antibodies to fight it, but you only have 25% of your white blood cell production to be able to fight it, so it's a losing battle. So then what starts to happen is you start to get chronic inflammation that goes to the areas that you had predisposition. So if you are someone that has gut health issues, that's your area that is going to focus on, and you're going to have inflammation in the gut health. If it's respiratory, if you have tumor or cancer, or if you have, say, endometriosis, or you have a skin condition, whatever that is, it's going to inflame that area, because now the body has hit the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight, and the body is in a chronic inflammatory state with a low immunity and a low immune response. Then you get your second booster, what the second booster has is it has 8 strands of HIV. And now what that does is it completely shuts off your ability to make white blood cells. And if you Google what that disease is, it is HIV. So now we have people that are walking around with no immune system, no ability to make an immune system, 81 strands of foreign bacteria, and then also 8 strands of foreign HIV, along with all the other harmful ingredients.
And that is a very theatrical video. They're moving the cameras around, and she's wearing a mask as she's talking. But we've seen a lot of medical professionals that have been punished for saying anything like that. And the only thing I would disagree with about that is the fact that there's any difference between these boosters. It's just that your body is different when they hit them again with the same garbage each time. This has already been documented in the regard that you see the massive increase in things like myocarditis and other stuff like that, depending on whether they've had a second or a third shot. And you see it go up pretty much exponentially with each one of these. Now, maybe that is the mechanism. I don't know. Certainly does sound plausible. But this is a planned culling, folks. And of course, as I've called these people the pharmakeia for the longest time, I think it's kind of interesting that in the book of Revelation, it talks about the merchants, the great men of the earth, for by their pharmakeia were all of the nations deceived. And of course, they did not repent of their murders. They did not repent of their pharmakeia. They did not repent of their sexual immorality or their thefts. And that is what we're looking at today with this Epstein elite that are part of this. As I said at the beginning of the program, you had a woman who did not want to talk about this. She said, I've not told anybody about what happened to me with the Epstein files, but then the Trump Department of Justice exposed her name along with other victims. And so she said, so now I'm coming forward to talk about this. And here's what's interesting. We've talked in the past about how Jeffrey Epstein was given a pass. First of all, the prosecutor, Alex Acosta, when he was called out on the light punishment that was given to Jeffrey Epstein, he made an excuse. He said, well, I was told that he was intelligence to lay off of this guy. So he gave him a sweetheart deal. Now, remember, I've talked about this over and over again. His lawyers, his defense attorneys, were Alan Dershowitz and Ken Starr. Ken Starr, who basically, he was supposedly the right-wing conservative Republican who was going to nail the crimes and the depravity of Bill Clinton. Instead, he worked out a way to give Bill Clinton a pass. Then he became a defense attorney for Jeffrey Epstein. That's not suspicious, is it? Yeah, he's part of the cabal. And they will use people like that. You know, here's a guy, he looks like a straight arrow conservative Republican, and yet he's out there doing deals for Democrats and for these people who are part of espionage blackmail rings, sexual blackmail. And then, of course, as I've mentioned, Ken Starr then gets to become the president of Baylor, a nominal Christian university. And he is there defending the rape scandal with the football team. That was his third strike, and he was out. They fired him at Baylor. But he's always able to work his way into these different places, the way he presents himself. So this woman was 18 at the time that she became a victim of Epstein. It's kind of interesting to see what happened. She was contacted by a guy with a famous modeling agency. His name's Brunel, French modeling agency. Now, this is the guy that Trump sent Ivanka to and had him take some very risque pictures of her when she was a teenager. This is a guy who was convicted of rape and pedophilia, and he died in prison in 2022. But of course, more connections to Trump, even sending his daughter to this guy. Well, this guy contacts this woman, and he said, well, I can make you a lot of money modeling in the United States. She had had some success as a teenager in her country in Uzbekistan and in Asia. So he says, oh, I can get you a job in big time in America. Sign this contract. You talk about a Faustian bargain. You talk about signing a deal with the devil. She signed the contract, and immediately she's in debt for more than her family makes in a year. Oh, yeah, well, these are the modeling agency fees that you just agreed to pay, and your traveling fees, and you're going to have some living expenses in America, where they gave them this slovenly small apartment that was shared by a bunch of these women all at the same time. So he gets her tied up in debt. And then he says, "I'm going to wait for you to get out." She was basically in tears at one point. She comes in and she's crying in front of him. He said, "I can see that you're upset. What is the issue?" She said, "Well, I'm in debt so much, my parents don't even make this much money in a year." And he said, "I can take care of that." He gets on the phone and he talks to somebody, says, "Give her parents $600. I mean, she was in over her head. She was in for over $10,000 or something at that point. And they don't make $10,000 in a year. So he calls somebody in Uzbekistan, and that same day, she checked with her parents. That same day, they got $600, supposedly from her. They contacted her, I guess. She said, "How did that happen?" I've often wondered, did he have some American that was living in Uzbekistan? Did he contact somebody in the government there? How did this all happen? You see, that's the kinds of connections that these people have. And they operate at the very highest levels of government and of intelligence agencies. And this guy was basically a scout for Epstein. And so he says, I don't got a way for you to get out of debt and maybe advance your modeling career. If you go down to, West Palm Beach or wherever, and you can work at Epstein's facility over the weekend, and then you can work on your modeling throughout the week. She said, well, that really didn't make any sense, but she was desperate for the money. She goes there, and he rapes her. The first time she saw him, she said he was getting a massage from another woman, and she noticed a black plastic band that was around his ankle with a small box and a blinking light attached to it. She said, "What's that?" And she said Epstein, the woman who was massaging him, started to laugh. That was his monitor. This guy was out on day release. That was part of the deal that Alan Dershowitz, Ken Starr, and Alex Acosta, who Trump would make a part of his cabinet in the very first administration, that was the deal that they worked out. As I've compared it in the past, I said it's very much, if you ever watch the Andy Griffith Show in Mayberry, the town drunk Otis would he would be out on day release, and he would come in, and he knew where the keys were, and he'd lock himself up when he got drunk and sleep it off. And Jeffrey Epstein, toward the end, gradually got less and less time that he had to be in the jail. At the end, he only had to be there for 8 hours, so he'd go to jail to go to sleep. And then he'd be out prowling and doing his usual Epstein stuff the rest of the time. He'd created some institution with his money just before this happened on his way in. He called it the Florida Science Institute. And it didn't have anything to do with that, but that was where he worked, supposedly. He also was forced to pay for guards. They were going to be off-duty sheriff deputies. And these sheriff deputies were not guarding him at all. As a matter of fact, this woman said they would sleep in the next room while he was engaged in his activities. She said, first time she saw one of these guys, she thought, finally, they've caught him. And then Jeffrey Epstein comes in, the guys, and they start making coffee and joking and laughing. And she said, I realized nobody was ever going to come after him. She didn't realize just how high up it went, did she? And so, again, a minimum security prison. He'd take regular naps on the futon in a conference room. One woman distinctly remembered moments when Epstein's ankle monitor would go off, forcing him to run outside to try to reset the device. His conduct was characteristically brazen. Both at West Palm Beach home and at the office, survivors say that he would sometimes sexually assault them while an officer in uniform was nearby, supposedly to keep an eye on him as a registered sex offender. Part of the deal was he was not supposed to have any contact with young women, but of course they were coming and going all the time. And the deputy sheriffs never said anything about that. And of course, she said, I realized when I saw this sheriff's deputy and they're having a good time here, that there was, that whether you scream or you shout from the top of the universe, nobody is going to care about it. That's right. That's even before you get to having one of his partners in crime become the president of the United States. And of course, his partner in crime has done everything he can to block any discovery of what Jeffrey Epstein was doing at his New Mexico ranch, the Zorro Ranch. Been allegations of people even killed and buried there. And they started investigating that during Trump's first term after the death of Epstein. And Trump's Department of Justice, so-called, shut that down in his first term. As all this stuff was rekindled with the Epstein document scandal, you had people in New Mexico outraged about it, and they allocated millions of dollars to do an investigation. Now the Trump administration is obstructing that investigation there at the ranch. And as one person pointed out, Scary Larry said, it's because Trump knows where the bodies are buried. And by the bodies, I mean children and babies as well. Yeah, that's right, folks. That's what we're talking about. That's how you get to a position where the great men of the world will not repent of their murders, of their pharmakia, of their lies, of their theft, of their wars. They won't repent of any of that stuff. The gates of hell are waiting for these people. Just amazing. Unrepentant about everything that they have done. Epstein was allowed to be at the foundation's office from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., Monday through Saturday. Then by May of 2009, after 1 year of that, the hours were extended, requiring him to only physically be in jail for 8 hours a day. The last 2 weeks before he was released under house arrest, he was also permitted to visit his West Palm Beach mansion for 2-hour windows in the afternoon. But supposedly he wasn't supposed to have any contact with friends, girlfriends, or minors, and yet he had contact with all of those. So again, when we look at this, this is just typical of the people that we have seen involved in all of this. When they went back and looked at it, they said, well, the sheriff's deputies were keeping records of this. He actually paid $128,000 to be monitored by deputies. Funny how that works out. You pay these people, you're their boss. They said that they wrote reports. They had 494 visitor logs. They were reviewed by the Prison Bureau in Florida. They said no violations of unauthorized contact were found, except that this woman says there were women coming and going, young women coming and going all the time. Not reported. The records were later destroyed per policy. There you go. Because we got a policy of not saying anything evil about what these elites are doing as they're doing it. She said she was approached by this guy, Jean-Luc Brunel, in 2008. Again, somebody who died in prison after being convicted for rape and pedophilia. And he was the one who signed her up into a debt and was the one who was the scout, essentially, for Epstein. And so when we look at where this is headed, she said, despite promises from the Justice Department to protect survivors, she was stunned to see her name released to everybody. Her family and friends did not know anything about this. She was outed by the so-called Department of Justice under Trump. Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche were responsible for that. She said when a group of survivors gathered on the steps of Capitol Hill last year, she chose to fly to Washington to join them. But she said she could only watch from the sidelines. She said they were telling their stories, and that started destroying me on the inside. She said it was so wrong for the government to not protect me. Understand, that is the Trump government, folks. The absolute betrayal of the Trump government. And as we talk about Todd Blanche, after the dirty dealing that he did with Donald Trump and this slush fund that he created, the immunity that he gave the Trump family and corporations against IRS audits, which many people have conservatively estimate would save them $100 million in taxes and fines. He is now claiming that that immunity deal, $100 million potential savings, is still in effect, even though the court voided it. He was under questioning to see if he's going to be confirmed to become the permanent attorney general. He is now just the acting attorney general after Pam Bondi stepped down. And so he has to go before the Senate to be confirmed. When he was asked about this, again, this guy is absolutely unrepentant. And this is typical of the crime and corruption that you have around Trump. He said, well, I can still do the immunity deal. The judge said that that tying it to this lawsuit was phony because the lawsuit was phony. But he points out she even said in her decision that as long as this is something that is policy of the Department of Justice, she has no power to prohibit that. She can say it's null and void as a part of this phony lawsuit where Trump is basically suing himself. And he even said that. When he said that about some prior lawsuits, he said, yeah, I'm basically suing myself. It's a crazy thing, isn't it? It's like, yeah, it's so crazy that they threw that out. And she said she referred the lawyers who were working on that case, she referred them to the bar for disciplinary action or being disbarred. And she said the same thing, he should be questioned about his involvement in this when he goes before the Senate. And they did do that, but it appears that he is absolutely unashamed of the corruption. He said he disagrees with the ruling. And when he was asked whether the Department of Justice and Trump would abide by the court's order, he responded by saying, well, the department is reviewing the court's order and weighing whether or not any response by the U.S. is even required. He claimed the premise of the question was flawed because the judge acknowledged, he said, that she cannot invalidate the settlement agreement. She did acknowledge in a footnote to her ruling that Trump and the government are still free to make a private agreement with the same terms as the IRS deal as long as it is separate from the IRS litigation and is not framed as a settlement of that case. So who calls him to the carpet for corruption? Well, he'd have to be impeached. That isn't going to happen. So yeah, he can do anything he wants. And Blanche can do anything that he wants. The only response to any of this is to not confirm this crook. And he is an absolute crook. This is also the guy who, we were just talking about the sweetheart deal that Jeffrey Epstein got. He's the one who interviewed Ghislaine Maxwell, went to the prison where she was in, and was there for the better part of the day. And then after he interviews her, they've come to an agreement about what she's not going to say. She gets transferred to a minimum security prison with extra privileges. The interesting thing about this is politically, Trump just campaigned in the Texas Senate race there. There was a runoff between John Cornyn and Ken Paxton. John Cornyn, of course, is the current senator, and he sided with Ken Paxton against John Cornyn. Ken Paxton won. So John Cornyn is a lame duck senator who's going to be out in January. This might be his opportunity for a parting shot. Revenge is best served cold, as they say. And it is so close on this that his vote could be the deciding vote. That would be an interesting twist on all this, wouldn't it? To see that he would not confirm Todd Blanche. And of course, it's not just Pam Bondi. It's not just Todd Blanche. It's not just people like Kash Patel. I mean, look at Kash Patel's hypocrisy about this. Here he is, before he became the FBI director, complaining about the FBI director having a private jet and the vast wasting of funds, the lavish lifestyle that goes along with it. Nobody has abused that private jet service more than Kash Patel. But here he is complaining about it when his predecessor was doing it.
And I'm not saying take all their funding. I'm not the defund everything guy. I'm just saying Chris Wray doesn't need a government-funded G5 jet to go
I
on
do.
vacation. Maybe we ground that plane. $15,000 every time it takes off. Just a thought.
Minimum.
Isn't that amazing? The hypocrisy of all this. Well,
it reminds me heavily of that clip from Africa where this politician says, corruption is bad. But if I am involved with it, corruption is good. I will defend it. And the crowd just celebrates because on an intrinsic level, somehow they understand. She's like, yeah, I do that too. You know, if I'm the one that's getting paid off, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, that's right.
I honestly admire that level of honesty in a politician.
Well, we got that level of honesty with Trump, don't we? That's the only thing he's honest about. He's honest about his unrepentant, unashamed corruption. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm making money. I know gas is $4 a gallon for you, but I'm getting much, much richer. You're going to have to suffer. It's okay.
Well,
it's okay.
As Trump said, he was very careful, he said, in his first term, but he said, I realize that nobody really cares. So he's helping himself. He has backed up the truck and he's loading it up with everything he can walk off with in Washington. Well, it's not just Kash Patel. It's not just Todd Blanche. It's not just Pam Bondi. Here's the guy who runs the IRS. What was his history? Well, he was working at J.P. Morgan. His name is Frank Bisignano, I guess is how you pronounce his name. I'm not really sure. When you've got a regime that is filled with criminals, it's going to act criminal, I guess. This guy who is now the head of the IRS, head of Social Security, more than a decade ago, he was co-chief operating officer at J.P. Morgan. And he had authority over every part of a massive financial institution there at the bank. People who were familiar with the matter said that he spied on fellow executives. He used his authority over the security department and his position to access sensitive information and internal communications without an apparent business justification. Well, it sounds to me like this is exactly the guy that you want to run the IRS for you if you're President Trump. The IRS has always been, and we always know this, it's like J. Edgar Hoover's FBI. Now, a lot of these bureaucracies exist to create dossiers so that you can blackmail people, to get information on people. And when you look at the income tax situation, there's absolutely no reason for them to have to get these signed confessions from people in order to get taxes from them. There's many ways that you can collect taxes. Europe gets more taxes, higher taxes against individuals. They do it through a value-added tax, which is added sales tax that's added at every time the product changes hands, not just the final sale. And so when he was there at J.P. Morgan, he directed his security staff to use software to snoop on the email of other executives, including one guy who's now the CEO of Wells Fargo. One executive said he suspected the spying. He put a code phrase in his email. He said Bisignano repeated that code phrase back to him. He also directed his staff to use software to surveil the work of employees, sometimes seeking to track their keystrokes, which can show draft versions of written material, others said. So with all this stuff happening, the information about this worked its way up to Jamie Dimon, or Demon, depending on your point of view. And he told Bisignano that he would help him to find employment somewhere else. That's a polite way of saying that you're done here. And of course, he's now found the perfect fit at the IRS, especially Trump's IRS. His enemies list, they're not just creating an enemies list like Richard Nixon did. They're executing on that as well. It was the head of the IRS under Nixon who exposed that enemies list. But that's not going to happen with this guy. We're going to take a quick break, folks, at the top of the hour. We're going to be right back. Stay with us.
You're listening. July of 1896, exactly 130 years ago, I warned this great nation of the government's plan to crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. Of course, that was before they started to bleed us dry with the death of 1,000 fiat paper cuts. But after you bought every single commemorative David Knight Show coin in gold color, the podcast's gold reserves are depleted. They issued 100 numbered gold-colored coins and declared the mint closed. the people cried out, "Free silver!" Well, the likes of J.P. Morgan can't stop this all-new commemorative coin. Now in silver color, while supplies last. This commemorative coin does not contain precious metal, but does keep the show on the air. Equal to the gold color, this limited run is numbered 1 to 100. Get yours today at thedavidknightshow.com. Hurry, because supplies are disappearing quicker than the purchasing power of the dollar.
And that's saying something, because the dollar's purchasing power is going really, really fast. Gone. So make sure that you don't just get a commemorative coin. Make sure you get the real gold as well. You can go to davidknight.gold. That'll take you to Tony Arterburn. You can get on a regular savings program there for pretty much any amount from $50 on up to hundreds, or I think some of them are much higher than that, thousands maybe, that you can set aside each month if you got the income to do that. And that's a way for you to set aside your savings and put it in something that's going to retain its value better than the fiat currency that we have out there. It's kind of interesting as Zero Hedge is looking at what is going on in the market. They said Trump has abused his ability to manipulate the market so much by the pronouncements that he's making about the war that it is no longer really having any effect. And it certainly isn't amongst the professionals in the bond market. They're not paying much attention to what he's saying. And so many of the things that are very negative in terms of the overall economy, especially the American debt and inflation, those things have been ignored because there's been this fascination and fixation on the war in Iran and the false hope that has been given by Trump. We're going to talk about that here. Let's take a look, first of all, at this is some footage that's come out from some people who were at the U.S. military base that was attacked. I think it was Friday. This footage, when you look at, and I saw pictures of it. It's like, well, those pictures are real. It's hard to tell with some of these things, but there were allegations that these pictures are put up. You see this massive amount of fire that's raining down on the military base there. I said, if that's an accurate picture of what happened there, I don't see how the casualties could be as small in number as they said. And now we see some of the devastation that is there. Take a look at this. This is from an American soldier who, this is the aftermath of what happened after those missiles hit the base. And there they are zooming in on some military equipment that is there. And it looks like the dust of Gaza as they bombed it back into dust. The aftermath of Iranian missile strikes on a U.S. military facility in the Middle East from U.S. soldiers themselves. One of them said, from what I'm hearing, we're getting projected impact data. However, the missiles are changing trajectory multiple times in flight. Now, this is something that's reported by honest analysts, people like Scott Ritter, people like retired Colonel Douglas McGregor. They were talking about that at the very beginning of it. They were saying, not only do they have some hypersonic missiles, but they also have the ability to change the speed and the trajectory of the missiles after they're in flight, which, when you look at the difficulty of shooting down a missile with a missile, it's heavily dependent on early calculation of the trajectory. And if they're able to change that in flight, then that makes it even more difficult to hit. Targeting data is obviously getting fed to them by China or Russia, said one of them, because where they are impacting and what they are targeting is insanely precise. And again, this is something else that we knew from the very beginning of this. You had Scott Ritter and Colonel McGregor talking about how they had taken out the central, if you will, eye of the missile defense system. It was a $1 billion antenna array that was taken out at the very beginning of the conflict. And so when you look at this and you understand that we have, of course, used Ukraine as a proxy against Russia, like Lindsey Graham said, we're getting our money's worth. Look at how many Russians we're killing. I want to do more, right? That's the kind of Machiavellian bloodlust that you see from all of these different countries. So, of course, they're doing that. RT, as a matter of fact, says Iran and the U.S. are already fighting their next war. The Yemeni Houthis have joined in the fighting in response to Saudi Arabia's strikes on their airport. They attacked Aba Airport in Saudi Arabia with missiles and drones, and they warned all airlines against flying in Saudi airspace. Now, the thing that stuck out to me about that is the fact they said in response to Saudi Arabia's strikes on their airport. So when we start a war here, right, the justification for doing these things is like, well, you hit us first, and this is just a response. We're not the aggressor here. Everybody has gone to such trouble to not be the aggressor, right? Making the case for why Putin had suffered for a very long time, and he did. I mean, you had the going back to the coup that was orchestrated in Ukraine. You had Lindsey Graham and John McCain there at the very beginning talking about how they were going to go after Russia, how they were going to go after Putin. And even coming back 2 years later in 2016, and Lindsey Graham, I've played the clip for you. Next year, we're going to go after Putin. Next year, you soldiers, you Ukrainian soldiers, you're going to be in Russia fighting them. Yeah, they're probably already dead, all those soldiers that he was addressing. They were not enthusiastically receiving Lindsey Graham's anointing to be sacrificial surrogates for the American geopolitics. But they were threatening Russia and Putin, and they had done the coup, and they were attacking their own civilians and parts of the country that wanted to have their independence. You know, they're proud of their independence from Russia. Fine. You have a right of self-governance, but so do the Russian-speaking provinces. But it was very important for people to have that argument to say, well, who's responsible for this? Is this Putin's aggression, or is this an aggression from NATO? And so people will debate that. They'll fight over that because that is the moral high ground. Unless you're America or Israel, and then you don't care about morality and you don't care about trying to justify what you're doing based on having the moral high ground. You just do it and defy people to stop you. That's where we are now with this country. The Omani territorial waters remain mined, and vessels can only move through Iran's territorial waters. The June memorandum has effectively forced the U.S. to accept this situation. But the contradictions have only deepened since then, says RT. For one thing, neither the U.S. nor Iran is interested in resuming the hostilities, but since neither of them inflicted a strategic defeat on the other in the previous round, they have been unable to agree on anything substantive. Any agreement is a compromise. Any agreement is a concession. But why should anyone give in if there are no losers? And again, what Trump is saying is they're desperate. They're desperate, but they refuse to come to the table, right?
President, there are no signs that Iran is ready to stop fighting. So what is the plan? Is the plan to just keep bombing until they give up?
There are no signs. Why, do you know something that I don't know?
Well, they continue to attack our allies and kill Americans.
You don't know what the dialogue is behind the scenes, that they want to meet desperately to try and end it because they're getting decimated. You don't get that when you listen to your fake station, but you don't know. You don't know anything.
So talks are
you know
still
something
possible,
that I don't know? Do you know something I don't know?
Well, tell us.
I will tell you. They want to desperately meet, and until they're ready to meet in a meaningful way, we have no interest in even.
So
they don't like talking about Venezuela, where we lost no people. I'll be going to Dover.
See, I did an act of aggression in Venezuela, and we got away with it. So that's success, right? I mean, there is no morality, there is no legality in anything that he's doing. He doesn't try to defend it on any of that. It's just, hey, we won and we had the fewest casualties, or we didn't have any casualties at all. That's his moral calculus that's there. And he can't even get through a sentence now without contradicting himself and lying. We've had many people point out, look, this guy is changing his story every day. Then it started, he says one thing in the morning, he says something different in the afternoon. Now he's saying different things within the same sentence. Oh, they are desperate to meet, but they don't want to meet. You know, what is that all about? High Boost says, yeah, we're going to go after Putin. I have a feeling Putin took out Ms. Lindsay. Lindsay goes over to Russia, actually went to Ukraine. He comes home in a body bag, nearly. But who knows what happened with that. And when you start doing assassinations, as that has now become our regular policy, it's one of those things like bombing civilian populations, which got normalized during World War II. And I think that, it's we constantly ramp this thing up, and we open up one Pandora's box after the other. set one precedent after the other. I think assassination is now on the table for everyone.
The thing is, war is horrible. There is no such thing as an easy, fast war. It changes the people that are involved directly with it, and it changes the culture of a country,
That's right.
especially when it's a country like America that has been at war constantly. It dulls you to it. It makes it seem normalized.
Has not felt the consequences directly, except for the soldiers that we send abroad and their families. The war has not been on American soil. I mean, we look at those pictures of devastation at the U.S. military bases, but that's not here in America yet. But I think that is going to change, and RT thinks that's going to change as well.
When I was hosting the show, I talked with Gerald Celente, and one thing that I pointed out is just the technology of the time during World War II meant we were largely isolated from it. They couldn't reach us very easily. We were far enough away that the possibility of a land war was almost negligible. And even just bombing us
you look
was
at the
almost
pathetic
impossible.
attempts. You had Japan put some incendiary bombs from fire bombs and everything onto some balloons and release them toward the west coast of America. Good luck with that.
One of the funny things is apparently that was more effective than they let on. And since they didn't talk about it, Japan assumed it did nothing and they just stopped.
Well, that's the other tactic, right? You hide your casualties, you hide the effect.
But
what the other guys
with the technology of today, we're not geographically isolated anymore. They can reach us. They can touch us.
And you can see through satellite what it's doing. If it starts massive forest fires in California, they can see that now with their stuff. So they're not dependent on the U.S. actually reporting that. RT says political logic favors war because it believes the contradictions can only be resolved by force. At the same time, nobody is ready to fight. Neither the U.S. nor Iran has the means to inflict a strategic defeat on the other side. Until one side is convinced that it can achieve its goal by force, this precarious and absurd balance will persist. Again, you need to understand that at the root of all this, this truly is Israel's hot potato that they dumped into Donald Trump and our lap. And nobody else really wants to have a part of this. As they point out, the U.S. tried to outsource the war to the Arabs, suggesting, you need to deal with it. You need to deal with Iran. But as RT says, there were no fools among the Arabs. Even the UAE, the only Arab nation to publicly side with the U.S., was not willing to fight. And it's understandable, because if they really got involved in a full-scale war with Iran, they would receive the brunt of it. You know, they're right there on the front lines, and all the missiles will be directed toward them. And the U.S. has shown that it cannot stop that. For its part, Iran needed the U.S. to lift the blockade, which created problems for it. The Gulf Arab states also sought to lift the blockade. In fact, the American blockade was a bigger problem for them than the blockade that was imposed by Iran. That was Mark Levin's genius idea. Well, if they have blocked the Strait of Hormuz, let's block it even more so. And what they did was they wound up blocking the Gulf Arab states more than they blocked what was happening out of Iran. As I pointed out before, Iran's exports of oil actually went up after the blockade and the presumed closing of the Strait of Hormuz. Long-term issues such as security agreements for Iran or permanent status of the Strait of Hormuz or the Iranian nuclear program, all of these are unresolved. These are all going to require complex compromises, and neither side is willing to do any compromise at this point in time. Nevertheless, some of the accumulated oil in the Gulf has entered the market through the partially open strait. It has significantly lowered prices and partially relieved Western countries. And when we look at what is behind that, what is not widely reported is that China itself has cut their consumption of oil significantly, adding, when you cut off the Strait of Hormuz, that cuts off 20% of the world's oil supply. They reduced their consumption so much that it's like adding back another 5% of that 20% that is there. Why would they do that? Are they trying to help the United States? No. As Gerald Celente has said so many times, he says, the business of China is business. The business of America is war. They don't want to see their production cut, so they're switching over to things using more coal and stuff like that, which, of course, they're allowed to do that. We're not allowed to do that. They're allowed to do that under the Paris Climate Accord. They can use as much coal as they want. They don't have to clean it either. It can be as dirty and as large a quantity as they desire. So they need to have energy for their production. They want to manufacture stuff, and they want people to be able to buy their stuff. They don't want to see a global depression. It certainly looks to me like Donald Trump's mission, should he decide to accept it as he was given the job again, is to create a global depression. Look at what he has done since he got in office. One trade war after the other, constantly throwing monkey wrenches not only into the American economy, but the global economy. When the elites want to do a great reset, one of the ways that you do that is with a great reset depression. Gerald has always called it the Greater Depression, but I think the purpose of it is to do the Great Reset. And of course, that also you partner it with war. What is Trump doing? As I said before, he's almost like a one-man fourth turning. Global depression and global war. But China doesn't want that. As a matter of fact, China has gone on record criticizing what Trump has done. This is the Chinese foreign minister.
For disruptions to the passage through the Strait of Hormuz is the illegal U.S.-Israeli military operations against Iran. Ceasefire as well as peace and stability in the Gulf region are the fundamental prerequisites to keep the international shipping route safe and unimpeded. Parties need to work together to promote de-escalation and prevent regional turmoil from having a greater impact on global economy and energy security.
Well, let me unpack that for you, because that was her actually a voice, or that was somebody doing some kind of robotic AI. It was pretty hard to follow. So Trump is saying, hey, we need to have $2 billion a day to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The Chinese foreign minister says, well, the strait was open before the war. The root of the problem lies in your illegal actions against Iran. You have created a global crisis out of nothing. That is exactly what is going on. And you see people in France and Spain and China, many people are saying that publicly. We all know that that is what is really happening here. But again, they don't want to see a global depression, but it appears that Trump does. So RT says it may appear that after the war in Iran, nothing has really changed. But in reality, it's become clear that the U.S. and Israel cannot change the regime in Tehran by military force. Iran cannot inflict critical damage on the U.S. and Israel. So the war has demonstrated to all sides the limits of their capabilities. Just as you could say the Ukrainian-Russian war has also shown the limits of their capabilities. Of course, RT is not going to say that. RT will tell you the truth. Russia Today will tell you the truth about what we're doing and the lies and the follies of our leaders, but they won't tell you the truth about the Russian leaders. Bearing this in mind, the parties will prepare for a new conflict. This is the type of thing that we saw in World War I. One of the reasons why that drug on in a quagmire-like situation was because with the trench warfare, they basically fought to a standstill, and they were equally matched. And you had to have some new approach to try to break that logjam, or you had to get sick and tired of sacrificing your own people's lives. I don't know that the latter part of that will ever work in this particular society. I don't think Trump will ever get tired of sacrificing American lives. I don't think War Pete will get tired of it either. It gets him fired up to see people killed, even if it's his own soldiers. It inspires him. Hey, look, we sacrificed them. Let's get some more people to throw on the altar of war. Preparing for the next war is going to take time, says RT. New ideas have to emerge. The resources have to be built up to support these ideas. Now, what will it take? Will it take an attack on the U.S.? Will that be done by Israel? Will that be done by the U.S. itself? Or will the escalated war on drugs that's now turning into a kinetic war with the cartels, will that be the basis of a war with America? But one way or the other, they're going to take it to a next level conflict. And when they go to a next level conflict, they're going to need to have the support of the American people. So there's going to have to be some kind of events here in America. During war, things that were previously unthinkable can happen only later to become the new norm. No one talks much about the assassination of leaders. It's considered to be sort of an anomaly. But now everyone must assume that it is possible. And they must assume that no one is invincible to assassination. including in the United States. When you start, just look at the new norms that we established during World War II. The idea that we would bomb civilian populations, that has now become standard practice. And when you look at what they established with an unthinkable event, something like 9/11, then we have the response from the government and the acceptance from the people of a police state domestically. So imagine what will happen after these, even an attempted assassination event. You know, we go back and look at America. America had firearms and it had the Second Amendment for a very long time. After we had a string of assassinations with JFK, RFK, and MLK, you had public support for this 1968 Gun Control Act. They started banning pistols, even though only one of the three was killed, they said, with a pistol. The others were killed with rifles. This is what you can do and how you can use these events to further your agenda. And of course, their agenda, we know, is a police state in every regard. As I point out, you know, you have these different movements, and the reason these things come to pass, they said, well, in this RT article, they said the Industrial Revolution created new military capabilities, and there was an immediate desire to test them. I think that is true. You know, when you look at what is happening with our defense spending, is it really keeping us out of war? Do we really have peace through strength? Do we really have peace through increased military production? Or are these very tools of war a temptation to seduce our politicians into starting a war? That's what I'm concerned about. And that's what I see happening, actually. The AI revolution is underway, says RT. It's going to offer radically new military capabilities. Even if Trump decides to bomb Iran until he runs out of bombs and missiles, it's unlikely to lead to regime change in Iran. And it's not going to stop their development of nuclear weapons. It'll make both of those things stronger. When you do civilian bombing, you strengthen the regime. It doesn't matter how bad it is. And we need to remember, and this is why I say all this narrative about saying, well, 47 years of this and so forth, going back to the Iranian Revolution. They deliberately do that because they don't want you to look at the true history of Iran and the U.S. It was the CIA that overthrew their elected government and installed a Shah. And the Ayatollah was blowback against that CIA coup and that CIA king. That's what Shah means in Persian, king. And his ruthless secret police that were trained by the CIA and Mossad. So we actually produced the Ayatollahs. That was a result of our misguided and evil policy from the very beginning. So we won the war, but we need another $1.5 trillion. This is the insanity of what Pete Hegseth was doing and his appearance before Congress.
Popular and unauthorized war abroad is a higher priority to this administration than their ability to feed their families and provide health care to their loved ones who are sick.
Well, Senator, you're talking about political trade-offs, and our job is to deliver for the United States military and the President of the United States. And we look at the cost of a nuclear Iran, and we want to prevent that for future generations.
Yeah,
and
right.
That requires funding and supplementals and this budget and next-generation capabilities, and that's why we're here today to request some of that to ensure we can ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon.
So you're essentially saying you're asking for literally $1.5 trillion for a war that President Trump said he already won. You're asking for $1.5 trillion, unlimited money for bombs, but insufficient money in for the American people, for their health care, their food, their housing, and our farmers, Secretary Rollins, who we have cut SNAP program. We are not funding the losses from
Again, this is the back and forth between Republicans and Democrats over the warfare state versus the welfare state. Guns versus butter. Well, I don't want a warfare state, and I don't want a welfare state either. But the reality is that when you start throwing money in these massive amounts, you're going to bring out the worst companies. And here's an example of this. This is Anduril, Palmer Luckey's defense company. also created by Peter Thiel. They unveiled their Thunder aircraft, an autonomous tilt-rotor drone designed to deliver missiles, drones, electronic warfare systems, and cargo into heavily contested airspace. And this is what really this is going to look like. It truly is a horrific future that they're designing for us, because when they spend these astronomical, unlimited amounts of money on weapons, the politicians are going to want to use them. Look at that. Look at what Trump did with Venezuela. He is so puffed up with pride, so arrogant about the fact that they could go in and murder people on the high seas and then kidnap their president, that encouraged him to do more of it until he met his match in this Iranian situation. And so what does that tell us about human nature? What does that tell us about the nature of these corrupt narcissists who become our leaders? But just take a look at what the future holds for us. We've already seen this portrayed in movies. And the Terminator. This is what they're actually creating. This is their inspiration for this stuff, their blueprint. Every dystopian movie you have seen, that's what these people want to do. That's what Palmer Luckey sees that movie, and he says, yeah, I want to build those machines. That's the kind of person that does this kind of stuff. It's just amazing to me. And this is what he built. This is what it looks like here. The Thunder drone. Like Thunderdome. An autonomous tilt-rotor platform. They can use that to kill people directly with missiles, or it can deliver drones, or it can do other electronic warfare. I've got to have that. And I've got the budget for that. I've got unlimited amounts of money to buy a bunch of these things. And look at how powerful that's going to make me. Right? This is the ring of power that Boromir desired so much. Well, we're going to talk more about that on the other side, folks. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to The David Knight Show.
Yes, a new era of maneuver warfare. Maybe we should spell that E-R-R-O-R. As I began the program, the lyrics, whenever I see this kind of stuff, the lyrics from Chicago come back to me. While the city sleeps, and we're all asleep, aren't we? Men are scheming new ways to kill us and to tell us dirty lies. That was Pete Hegseth's role yesterday before Congress. This is a drone that weighs more than 1,320 pounds. They have these different groups of attack rotorcraft, and so based on the group that's in, that's people can work out that's how much it weighs. It weighs more than 1,320 pounds, and they've got pictures in this Zero Hedge article of it from the front as well as from the side profile, and there's the different classifications of drones. There it is from the side, and there are the weapons that they can deploy against people. The first of its kind for attack aviation, a thunderous step forward for maneuver dominance. And of course, that's what they want. All the money that we send to the Pentagon, this is for these politicians to dominate other countries and dominate us. Remember, as Madison said, the means of defense abroad have always become instruments of tyranny at home. That will become an instrument of tyranny. They're already using drones attached to flock cameras. This is something we're already seeing in massive ways. And when these people get up there, people like Pete Hegseth, they start monologuing like a supervillain. And so, as I said before, do we create these systems to protect and to defend? Or are they there seducing politicians with the power to go to war? And hey, we can win it without losing much in terms of lives or capital. Well, that remains to be seen. But it is a seduction, isn't it?
It's nice to know that we're fighting a bargain basement budget war, you know?
Well, they're looking at...
There's no such thing. There's no such thing as a cheap war, people.
That's right.
It's always expensive.
That's right. The broken window fallacy is always the case as well. But this is the way they sell it. Economies of scale to drive down cost and to de-risk the pathway to large-scale production. These people are very good at selling death and war, aren't they? And while they do that, they also increase the risk of large-scale war and large-scale death, including the risk that your politicians will be seduced into wars of aggression, seduced into wars of choice, as Donald Trump was seduced by Venezuela. Andrew just made the tilt rotor version of the Terminator Hunter Killer drone, said one person. I guess I need to brush up on my counter-Terminator skills because that reality is happening. What could possibly go wrong? Said sarcastically. Well, I just got to say, where's Ted Kaczynski when you need him? He was kind of like Sarah Connors. Saw this coming a long time ago. So meanwhile, Zero Hedge's response to all this is to write an article, How to Profit from Asymmetric Warfare Boom. Yeah, right. How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Killing. You can bring back Dr. Strangelove with all this stuff. Because it's not just about the bomb. It isn't just the bomb that kills people. It's this asymmetric warfare that's going to kill people. So Hegseth and Dan Kane were on Capitol Hill saying that they're out of money. We got to have more money. And remember, isn't it interesting to see all of these people in the Trump administration that were kind of, I guess we could say, secondary characters in 9/11? People like Rudy Giuliani, who was there, who was literally part of the cover-up, literally removing the debris and the evidence there and giving many people a death sentence, sending them in without even having a mask for the dust. You know, that's one thing that the masks are good for. But we're not going to give people masks for that. Instead, we'll tell people, you got to wear them in 2020. But in 2001, no, we don't have any masks to give you. So that was Rudy's role in 9/11. And then you have Lucky Lutnick, who's the Commerce Secretary. He was lucky that he didn't show up on his building that day because everybody else there, including his brother, died that day. But that was the day that he decided to take his child to kindergarten for some reason. So he had an alibi. And then you look at Dan Kane. He was one of the pilots that was sent to intercept United Flight 93. They said they never got there to shoot it down. So I guess there's nothing to make of the fact that he's now chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, right? From his direct involvement in 9/11 to that. You don't talk about what happened with these people, and you get rewarded for it, don't you? So again, they focused on an $80 billion supplemental funding request, but really what they're looking for, as you heard in that questioning, they already have a record defense budget of $1 trillion. And that's not enough. As soon as they hit that record, Trump and War Pete are saying, we got to have a 50% increase. We got to have another $500 billion. It wasn't that long ago that was more than the entire budget, but now that's just the increase that they want. They want to go to $1.5 trillion. Just days after, this is from Just the News, they say, just days after 2 service members were killed. No, come on, you know better than that by now. They've admitted to 4 and many other casualties. That really is downplaying what happened to the American soldiers because it's not important to them. It's about their ego politics, their geopolitics, if you will. Are we going to audit their casualties just like we audit the Pentagon budget? No. No, both the blood and treasure that is spent in these follies is hidden from the American people and everybody else. You're not allowed to know how much money they're spending on anything. You're not allowed to know where trillions of dollars went missing. That was another aspect of 9/11, of course. Not allowed to know any of that. And you're not allowed to know really what the true casualties numbers are. Nobody's going to audit any of this stuff. So the testimony additionally comes today after the Pentagon confirmed that, well, okay, now we're going to admit that nearly 100 American troops have been injured in the conflict so far. You better believe that it's worse than they're telling you. I don't believe anything that comes out of the Pentagon, especially out of Trump's Pentagon. A couple of comments here. Syrian Girl says, even World War II broke millions of the men who fought in it. My father's life was terribly impacted. My husband's uncle was turned into a total brute. Many never got their lives back onto a positive track. That's right. They're actually in battle, even if they know that it's a just cause, even if they understand, well, we're fighting to defend our family because we were attacked first. The horrific aspects of war are something that they can't get over in many cases. Atomic Citizen 865 says, as the war moves on, I wonder how many in China are Epstein class. I believe Israel has done something worse than Epstein, and they are imploding. The state may be gone by the end of the year. Well, I don't know. We'll see what happens. I think if Israel is about to fall, they have what they call their Samson option, which is, if we fall, we're going to take everybody with us, right? Which is what Samson did when he got in the temple. And so if you wound them severely enough, they'll kill everybody. That's their mentality. It truly is a synagogue of Satan. This is why I say there is absolutely, it's such an incredible contradiction, an oxymoron to talk about Judeo-Christian values. I understand where that comes from. Many people think, well, you know, we have the Mosaic Law, and we have the Old Testament, and we have those principles that are there. So Judeo-Christian, right? Except the modern Jewish state that we're talking about, as well as the rabbinical Judaism that is there, is as anti-Christ as you can have. They deny everything about Christ. They have, through their Hollywood domination, tried to teach the world to use the name of the Lord Jesus Christ as a curse. They've trained everybody in the world to try to do that. I mean, they are the synagogue, the seminary of Satan. This is seminal in what they're doing. They absolutely despise Jesus, and they are focused on attacking him in every regard. They're as anti-Christ as you can get. So how can you have anti-Christ Christian society, anti-Christ/Christian values? It's nonsense. Nobody talks about atheist Christian values. They're not even agnostic or neutral on it. They don't just deny it, they despise him, they curse him. I don't see how that is going to change. Epstein Island says, doesn't Israel have health care, a decent infrastructure, enough food, lower gas prices because we're funding them? Yes. They get a free ride. You know, Trump has talked about that. He says, you know, what about this free ride that Europe is getting because we're paying for their defense? Well, let's do that with Israel now. As a matter of fact, over the weekend, there were a lot of memes out there because the Trump administration is now trying to criticize China. It's either China's fault or Biden's fault, everything that's happening to the United States. It's not Israel's fault, not at all. And so you had a lot of people who are putting up memes of, we've seen all the memes put together of all the politicians, including governors like Ron DeSantis, going to Israel, putting on a yarmulke and touching the wall, in reverence to the wall. So people are putting up all these memes about, China's doing this to us and China's doing that, which are all things that we know that Israel is doing to us. And so they put politicians with the stereotypical little cone-shaped hat that, Chinese people are wearing, the rice paddies. So they're wearing these cone-shaped Chinese hats and they're touching the Great Wall of China, right? No, that's not happening, but we do know a country that is doing that to us and doing it to the politicians.
Which, I mean, China's wall is actually better than their wall. It's bigger. That'd be a way cooler wall.
A lot more places where you could touch it.
Yeah. I mean, they could line every American politician up, front to back.
I don't see the Chinese, however, standing at their wall doing thrusting motions and a sexual overture to it. That is something that you do see in Israel, however. So Hegseth is floundering, says The Independent out of UK. Struggled to justify the continuing war in Iran as he went to Congress to ask for more than $70 billion worth of supplemental funding. But he wound up retreating into a series of embarrassing buzzwords. Yeah, that basically is what he does. He resorts back to sound bites, repetitive sound bites. He headed to Capitol Hill to ask for another vast pile of money for a war that is, pick your choice. Here's the multiple choice. Either it's a war that's long over, or it's a war that isn't over, or it's a war that's been going on for decades, or it's all Joe Biden's fault anyway. So which one of those is it? A, B, C, or D? Well, apparently he checked the box on each and every one of those during his testimony. U.S. intelligence experts have reportedly warned that the Trump administration, that they see no end in sight for the conflict. And of course, when Netanyahu and the head of Mossad came and sold that, the response from the CIA, Ratcliffe, he said it's just a fantasy that they're selling you. Islamic Revolution Guard Corp announced, quote, Trump should know that by God's grace, even if this war lasts for several years until the very last day, our missiles and drones will rain down on American criminals. And so the writer here with The Independent says, well, it definitely sounds like something that a few more drones and bombs could fix, doesn't it? No, it is deep-seated. The root cause here is what is happening with the Greater Israel Project, what is happening with the revisionist Zionists. They are the ones who not only want a greater Israel, but they don't even want to negotiate for it. They don't want to try to even approach it in a peaceful way. They want to come in guns a-blazing. This is the what we see in a microcosm with the settlers who come in, pulling guns on people and saying, get out of here or I'm going to kill you right now. That is basically a small microcosm of what the radical revisionist Zionists are doing as a government policy. They are as much terrorists as the Islamic jihadists. Flip sides of the same coin, really. So he didn't have much to say, Hegseth didn't, except to talk about Joe Biden. Hegseth said, we live in a dangerous world. He added that Biden had presided over social experiments and globalist appeasement. Well, that may be true, but, what are you doing to make it safer? Or are you making it more dangerous? Just because Biden was bad doesn't mean the policies of Trump and Hegseth are good. As a matter of fact, I would say, it's Jesus who said, blessed be the peacemakers. So I wonder if the warmongers, if the war makers are cursed. I think they are. I think the entire world is cursing them, but I think God is as well. The Pentagon, he says, is no longer run by bureaucrats. It's now running like a business. I just showed you pictures of what that business is producing. Andrew and others, these people, the business, they are real-life merchants of death. That's the business that's being run there. We are bringing lethal innovation to the battlefield. Is that something to cheer? Nobody cheers that except for Hegseth and the people who are making money from it. Lethality that provides peace through strength. No, it provides temptation through strength. He added with absolutely no sense of irony, only Hegseth could deliver lines like this with a straight face. Peace is guaranteed through killing. That's right. That's what he's telling you. Yeah, we need to expand production lines and accelerate delivery of munitions. That is totally has nothing to do with the war in the Middle East. Instead, it has to do with AI. It has to do with a space race. And of course, it has to do with Joe Biden. Why are emergency funds needed right now when you still have cash and you could go to Congress and legitimize war in the usual way? Asked Senator Patty Murray. The Democrats are the only ones who are asking him the hard questions. And again, they would not ask these questions were it a Democrat puppet of Israel that was doing this. Extra funding is needed, he said, because of the, quote, gross negligence of the Biden administration. No, nowhere in any of this is Israel brought up by either side, actually. He then went on a long aside about recruiting records and how Americans are desperate to sign up for what Trump is doing because they were not inspired by Biden. Maybe it had something to do with vaccine mandates, the vaccine that was produced by Trump. What do you think? He said, my point is that a lot of this doesn't sound like an emergency, said Patty Murray. She then quoted his own words back to him. He said in April that Iran's military capabilities were functionally destroyed. He paused and he said, well, they're in the worst place they've ever been, he eventually said. So what's going on with Trump's abandoned claim that he would charge tolls in the Strait of Hormuz, asked Murray. Hegseth stammered. He was asked again, and eventually he settled on, well, we have a blockade. So Dick Durbin, another Democrat, pressed Hegseth on precisely why he'd need an emergency sum of $70 billion if he already had that exact amount still hanging around from the last budget. He said, you've left some change on the dresser. That's one way to put it, I guess, you know. Certainly, by spending tens of billions of dollars, you have changed our society, haven't you? As well as the value of the dollar. It was Everett Dirksen, who was also, now this is Dick Durbin, who is from Illinois, was a previous senator from Illinois who was a Republican and a conservative one at that, fiscally conservative. He used to say, well, $1 billion here and $1 billion there, pretty soon you're talking about real money. Yeah, that's right. But nothing is real to these people. They live in a surreal world that has been divorced from reality. Hegseth went straight back to Biden. He said, well, we're rebuilding the military from what was done under the Biden administration. But in a telling moment during his questioning by Durbin, he got wound up and he shouted a complete non sequitur. The Biden administration just ignored hypersonics. We're not going to do that. We're not going to ignore all of our Terminator weapons either. Durbin responded asking whether Hegseth has an estimate on how much the war he started has cost America so far. The answer he gave was $37.5 billion. Now, I've reported independent sources who have gone back and totaled this up. They come up with even more than 3 times that amount. But that's exactly what we'd expect from the Pentagon, right? You think they're going to tell you the truth about the money or the blood that they have spilt? No. Senator Jack Reed, another Democrat, said Trump deserves praise he launched into questions with Hegseth, who then started talking about Biden and said Trump deserves praise for having the courage to go to war. Think about that. What kind of courage does that take? What kind of a courage does it take to waste lives and money like that? He didn't have the courage to stand up to Israel, did he? But he does have the courage to defy the Constitution because he knows nobody is going to impeach him. Theoretically, he could be risking impeachment, but only theoretically. And he is not going to stand up to people who give him money, the people who give him orders attached to that money either. Reed said, so he should be praised for starting a war without authority? He should be praised for collapsing the economy? Yeah, that's exactly what these people are telling you. That's what Lindsey Graham told us. He said he's better than Reagan, isn't he? Well, 17 Americans dead, 1 missing, a forever war, a destabilized nation, skyrocketing oil costs, fertilizer costs in the middle of planting season. And with that kind of track record, why wouldn't you give somebody $70 billion more? Yeah, as a matter of fact, the real problem is that we just don't have enough testosterone in the military. Want to have everybody tested, including the women. Got to get them testosterone. This is from a guy who, I don't know if he could pass a testosterone test. I don't know if he could pass a written test or a sobriety test. Whether or not Pete Hegseth is still a drunk. He is absolutely drunk with power. Everybody can see it. I don't think he can walk a straight line or tell a straight story. He's so drunk with power. Well, you do realize, said one person, I've talked about this before, when you look at what the Israelis are doing in Lebanon, how they're rooting up olive trees there and destroying what has been family farms for for centuries that have been there. That is basis of many of these poor people's income. They're just going in and ripping up these ancient olive trees. And when they started doing that, many people said, well, the Israelis hate them because so many of them are allergic to the pollen of the olive trees. I said at the time, I said, isn't that a tell that these people are genetically not connected to real Israelites? Going back, if you're a student of the Bible, do you think maybe the Mount of Olives rings a bell to you? This is a fundamental plant to their society. And yet, when you look at the vast, widespread allergies to it, it's reported that 66% of Israel's population is allergic to the native olive trees. And yet you're supposed to tell us that these people are from that area? Only 1% of the world's population is allergic to olive trees. But 66% of these people, these fake Israelites who have come from Europe, these cosplay Jews, which is what they really are, doesn't that tell you that they're not really from the area? It should. But there's other clues as well that they are not really the Jews of the Old Testament.
The entire state of Israel is just a LARP.
That's right. Yeah, it's a cosplay. Here's what Chuck Baldwin said about it.
The Zionist state of Israel is not biblical Israel. And the Israelis are not the Israelites. There is no future nation of Israel. Not now, not in a future millennium, not ever. The covenant with Moses was conditional on the Israelites keeping the covenant. They broke the covenant, and God did what he said he would do. He destroyed their nation forever. What we see in Palestine today is a devilish counterfeit Israel with zero relationship to Old Covenant Israel.
Zero relationship. And that includes no temple, no sacrifices for sin. They don't follow the Mosaic law. As a matter of fact, as I've said many times, they don't pay any attention to what they call the Tanakh, what we call the Old Testament. We call it the Old Testament because it testifies of Christ, not about an ethnic group of people. That is the fundamental error that is very serious, I think, in terms of many Christians. It is now, I guess, the majority position of Protestant Christians that I am standing against. And I stand against it because they stand for Israel. I stand for the Lord Jesus Christ. That is what the Old Testament is about. Jesus said it. He said, you search the scriptures, the Old Testament, because in them you think you have eternal life, but they testify of me. The Old Testament testifies of the Lord Jesus Christ, not of Israel. It testified of a future Messiah, not of Israel, a future Israel. That's not what it is about. Instead, these cosplay Jews have done this. This is, as somebody said, we got the Odyssey is now a cultural event, so let's turn that into a political meme. And so here we have Trump as the giant Trojan horse, and wait till you see what is inside of him when they go in. And the camera goes inside the Trojan horse to show Netanyahu and the Jews that are there. Of course, it depicts the ultra-Orthodox Jews who really are against the Zionist state of Israel. The ultra-Orthodox don't endorse that at all. That's part of the issue. That's the thing that makes them and many of the liberal American Jews very angry to be lumped in with these revisionist Zionists that are there. So you had a press conference there. I played that clip earlier where Trump said, well, you don't know anything. It was Mary Bruce from ABC News. She said, Mr. President, there's no signs that Iran is ready to stop fighting. So what is the plan? Yeah, trust that plan, right? Is the plan to keep fighting until they give up? He said, how would you know there's no signs? Do you know something that I don't know? Maybe he doesn't know, or maybe he doesn't care about what happened over the weekend. I think it's the latter. I think he doesn't care about it. She said, well, they continue to attack our allies and to kill Americans, and he cut her off. He said, you don't know what the dialogue is behind the scenes. They want to meet desperately and try to end it because they're getting decimated. You don't get that when you're listening to your fake station, but you don't know anything. Yeah, don't trust your lying eyes. You know, when he tells us, and Pete Hegseth tells us, that they have no capability left, that they can't fight back, and then they do, we see massive devastation rained down on American military bases, rained down on other Gulf states, and even in some cases rained down on Israel. Just pretend that isn't happening because Trump says it can't happen. That's why I played for you yesterday, Maria Bartiromo. How could this happen, she said, as the military base was attacked. Trump has said they don't have any missiles, and we can never question what Donald Trump says, not on Fox News anyway. And so as all this is going on, you have the finance minister of Israel, Bezalel Smotrich, said, well, Israel has no interest in joining the limited confrontation between Iran and the USA. Think about that. No interest in joining this. They were the ones who started it. And it's Marco Rubio who even said that. He said, well, Israel said we're going to attack, and we decided that, well, if they're going to attack, we're going to get attacked, so we'll join them. But now Israel says that it's our confrontation between the U.S. and Iran. And they have no interest in joining that limited confrontation. So the current situation, he went on to say, the current situation is the best possible one for us, for Israel. And that is that you have Americans fighting their war for them. You have Americans attacking Iran. And this is what unregistered foreign agents of Israel like Mark Levin and Ben Shapiro are constantly telling us. So after all that, he says, you don't know anything. Do you know something that I don't know? She says, well, tell us if there's something that we should know. I will tell you that they desperately want to meet. And until they are ready to meet in a meaningful way, we'll have no interest. There you go. Like I said before, it used to be that Trump would say one thing one day, and then he'd contradict himself another couple of days after that. Then he started contradicting himself in the afternoon based on what he said in the morning. And Emmanuel Macron in France said, if you want to be taken seriously, don't contradict yourself in the same day. Here he is contradicting himself in the same sentence until they are desperate to meet, but they don't want to meet. What does that mean, right? They're desperate to meet, but they're not ready to meet. He contradicts himself even within the same sentence. Then he went on to blame the failure that had happened at the military base in Jordan. He blamed it on the Jordanians. He said, well, they let something slip through. It's not our fault, right? Except that's not what the soldiers on the ground said. And that's not what we've been told by the honest people from the very beginning of this conflict. They said, well, the problem is that they have capabilities that the U.S. is not acknowledging. They have the capability to change the speed and the trajectory of their missiles after they've launched them. And the anti-missile defense systems are relying on a steady trajectory and steady speed in order to be able to take these things down. That's why it's difficult to take them down. So again, the U.S. soldiers say it's Iran's capability, but Trump will keep lying to you and telling you that they have no capability. Simply isn't true. Aaron Rupar said on X, he said, a deluded Trump makes it clear that there is no end in sight to his quagmire in Iran. He lashed out a reporter who accurately pointed out to him that Iran shows no signs of being defeated. Just says to her, you don't know anything. And then he goes on to say that he is honored to go to Dover for the transfer of the remains of the soldiers that he killed with his useless war for Israel. And he threatened a further escalation. Again, more of the same thing. But what else would you expect from the father of the vaccine? He has millions of people's lives and deaths, I should say, on his hands already. Thank you for joining us. Have a good day. The common man. They created Common Core to dumb down our children. They created Common Pass to track and control us. Their Commons Project to make sure the commoners own nothing. And the communist future. They see the common man as simple, unsophisticated, ordinary. But each of us has worth and dignity, created in the image of God. That is what we have in common. That is what they want to take away. Their most powerful weapons are isolation, deception, intimidation. They desire to know everything about us while they hide everything from us. It's time to turn that around and expose what they want to hide. Please share the information and links you'll find at thedavidknightshow.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. If you can't support us financially, please keep us in your prayers. thedavidknightshow.com.